Welcome to Chapter 7, Problem number 1. So on page 235. In this particular case, we're going to start off with a fairly simple type of example, just to get you used to the... Welcome to Chapter 7, Problem number 1 on page 235. We're going to start off with a simple example, just to get used to you getting used to calculating the numbers. We'll also use the spreadsheet, so I'll do an Excel version of this. So in part A, we're asked to calculate what is the probability that the sample or the average is less than 95. So in this particular case, you can see the formula at the bottom. We find out the z-score, and we read from the z-score table. We get 0.0062, which is what you can see in the printout, which we'll do. We won't use PHstat, we will use Excel. So that same Excel sheet that you've been using will continue to use. Now there's one really important difference here. In chapter number 6, there was no sample size. You were just given the standard deviation, and you use that as your denominator. If you look in your textbook, the denominator has changed. The denominator when you have a sample is the standard deviation divided by the square root of the sample size. So in this particular case, you would have the standard deviation, which is 10. The sample size is 25. The square root of 25 is 5. So I'll put this on the screen for you. If I can get this to cooperate, that is. So S is 10. And then the standard deviation is square root. Well, this is part of it anyways. So S is the standard deviation. So then you take the square root of the sample size. So in this case, you take the square root of 25. You get 5. And you wind up with the 10 divided by the 2 and divided by the 5 gives you S for your standard deviation. So you have to be careful to make sure that you do that. And you can see that in part D, they actually show you where the 10 is divided by the square root of 25. That's the standard deviation in those larger brackets. And we'll talk about that again when we get to part D. So in this particular case, you can see how they did it for part B, as far as between 95 and 97.5. So they already had the z-score for 95. You find out the z-score at 97.5, and the z-score at 97.5 is negative 1.25, which has a p-value or a probability of 0.1056. You can actually see that in the PHstat in the top right-hand corner. Because you're taking that slice from 95 to 97.5, you subtract the two, and you get basically 10%, 0.0994. In part C, they're asking above 102.2. So once again, you find the z-score. You get a z-score of 1.1. And because it's above, and remember, the normal distribution is infinite to the negative infinity and positive infinity. So you find out the area from negative infinity to a z-score of 1.1. A z-score of 1.1 is 0.8643. You subtract it from 1, so the area to the right or above 102.2 is 0.1357, so 13.57%. Now, part D, there's a 65% chance that X bar, the average, is above what value? So in this particular case, you rearrange the formula. So you have X bar on the left, and you take the z-score of 0.39, which is a 0.65 as far as your probability, or 65%. You multiply that by the standard deviation and you subtract it from 100. Or as you can see in the PHstat printout, which again we'll do in Excel, you actually put in the 35% because we have 65%, X is above 65%. So this is the cumulative percentage of 35. So 65 to the left and 35 to the right. And it gives you the X value of 99.229. So that's the X value, not the probability. So hopefully you found that helpful. And the biggest thing with Chapter 7 that's different, you will have a standard deviation that you have to calculate. And you'll take what you had before, the standard deviation for the population, which in this case is 10, and you now need to divide it by the square root of the sample size. So in Chapter 7, if you see a sample, you have to use the sample size. In Chapter 6, there was no sample size given. So in Chapter 7, the biggest difference is you're going to need to do the calculation to find the standard deviation, or the final value of the standard deviation for the sample. And you can see in Part D, and it's in your textbook, of course, you take the population standard deviation, which in this case is 10, and divide it by the square root of 25. So you should make a note. If there's a sample size given, I need to do a calculation to get my standard deviation. Otherwise, if you just put in 10, all your numbers are going to be wrong. You're going to get the entire problem wrong. So just be careful with that.